She called me worthless in court. The judge's words made her tremble. Vanessa Price stood just outside the courthouse, the sharp chill and faint drizzle blurring her vision as she held tightly to a weathered leather portfolio. The fabric of her trench coat was thin, frayed at the cuffs, bearing the creases of long days and anxious nights. She was a junior paralegal, fresh from a modest upbringing, where her mother juggled cleaning jobs and her father labored late hours as a janitor. This small claims hearing, though routine to others, was her debut, a chance to carve a foothold in a profession that often dismissed people like her before they even spoke. Inside the packed courtroom, Vanessa followed her supervisor, Mrs. Caldwell, across the polished wooden floor. The heavy scent of pine polish mixed with the faint aroma of old paper and whispered conversations. As she knelt to organize a stack of documents on the evidence table, her hands trembled ever so slightly. That's when she caught the unmistakable glare of Sylvia Barnes, opposing counsel, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit. Sylvia's mouth curved into a cruel snark as she stepped closer, voice dripping with condescension, audibly mocking. "Honestly, you're wasting everyone's time." The words sliced through the noise like a blade, and heads quietly turned toward Vanessa, like specters at a show. A stubborn blush crept down Vanessa's neck. The courtroom's cacophony felt magnified, her confidence fraying with every tick of the grand clock above. Her fingers fumbled as she shuffled papers, and the distinct rustling caught the eye of the judge. A small, yellow post-it fluttered free from Vanessa's grasp, landing softly on the polished floor. It bore a handwritten note in neat, deliberate script. "Remind me to check page 8, VP." The initials matched Vanessa's own, a subtle but cryptic sign, something overlooked by others, but tangible in its quiet presence. Vanessa rushed to bend down and retrieve the note, casting a fleeting glance at Sylvia, whose brow momentarily creased, betraying a flicker of unease before her composed facade returned. The judge, Miriam Goldstein, an imposing woman with silvery hair and sharp eyes, observed the exchange neutrally yet intently from the bench, her expression unreadable but attentive to the swirling undercurrents. As Vanessa straightened, clutching the note and her disorganized papers, she felt it, a growing storm of nerves and determination swirling inside her chest. She was underestimated, overshadowed, and dismissed. But this fleeting detail, a delicate nudge from the judge herself, sparked a flicker of hope. Perhaps, despite the odds stacked against her, Vanessa Price was not quite as invisible or worthless as some wanted to believe. The courtroom buzzed with quiet murmurs and shuffling papers as Vanessa moved carefully around the evidence table, clutching her enlarged folder with sweaty palms. Sylvia Barnes had taken center stage. The opposing attorney's sharp suit, perfectly polished shoes, and assertive posture set her apart instantly, an image of power and control. With a red pen, Sylvia mercilessly underscored and scribbled dismissive notes on Vanessa's carefully prepared documents. The thin rustling echoing like whispers of disdain through the silent room. "She barely knows which way is up," Sylvia whispered venomously to the bailiff stationed nearby. Vanessa caught the words despite the hush, and a stab of self-doubt wrestled inside her. Her heart pounded, and she felt the curious, critical gaze of every seasoned lawyer and client, as if they could all smell hesitation on her. Sweat slid down her back in cold rivulets despite the chill of the courtroom air. But there, amid the crowd, she caught a flicker of warmth, a kind smile and a brief nod from Michael, the court's elderly clerk. His silver hair and gentle eyes radiated quiet reassurance, as if saying, "You're not alone." Then the judge's clear voice cut through the tension. "All evidence must be officially submitted before recess," Judge Miriam Goldstein announced, her tone strict but fair. 40 minutes remaining. The brief but critical deadline snapped through Vanessa's mind. 40 minutes to untangle the mess she feared was growing worse. She could almost feel the tight coil of the clock's second hand ticking against the walls. Panic surged when Vanessa glanced inside her bag. 2 vital papers, Supporting pieces she had painstakingly organized were tangled at the bottom, stuck beneath a heavy legal binder and an out-of-place lunchbox. Her attempts to retrieve them would take precious time. She swallowed hard, fingers trembling as she mentally plotted the fastest way to get the files out without attracting more unwanted attention. Around her, the courtroom's seasoned professionals offered nothing but cool, measured looks. Some threw sideways glances that sliced with a subtle contempt, as if doubting her ability to keep pace in a battle that Sylvia transformed into a spectacle. The severity of the setting didn't allow for mistakes, even small ones. Yet Vanessa's hands shook, and for a moment she felt every eye pinning her down like a bug on the polished floor. But the brief nod from Michael lingered in her mind, a single grain of kindness in a landscape of quiet judgments. His unspoken support grounded her. She took a slow breath, straightened her shoulders, and forced herself to focus. The judge's clock was counting down, but for now, she just needed to last the next few minutes, work through the papers, face Sylvia's razor-sharp barbs, and stay afloat amid the subtle but cutting waves of doubt. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. Vanessa's fingers trembled as she reached deep into her overstuffed bag, the worn handles biting into her palms. She had to find those two crucial papers before Judge Goldstein's recess, or risk undoing every small effort she'd made. Her breath caught in her throat when she stumbled back and accidentally kicked a large file box, sending it toppling sideways. Folders, papers, and confidential documents spilled out, fluttering like defeated birds across the gleaming marble floor. A chorus of soft giggles rose from nearby clients and court staff, their faces a mixture of pity and barely concealed amusement. Vanessa's cheeks ignited, the heat flushing deep through her chest as she sank to her knees, desperately scooping up scattered papers. Her eyes stung with tears that she fought to swallow, helpless beneath mounting embarrassment. She heard the low murmur of her boss, Mrs. Caldwell, leaning close and whispering without patience, "Vanessa, you're not helping." The words struck harder than any public scorn, making her shrink inside her trench coat. This wasn't how the day was supposed to go. She prided herself on quiet competence, but here, in front of an audience of sharp eyes and sharper tongues, she looked small and fumbling. The idea drifted across her mind, a whisper of surrender. Maybe she wasn't cut out for this world of polished lawyers, tight schedules, and ruthless competition. Maybe the dream of becoming a respected paralegal was just that, a fragile dream. Her hands still trembling, Vanessa paused to catch her breath. The courtroom smelled faintly of cleaning solvent and cold air conditioning, a sterile backdrop to her spiraling thoughts. A patch of sunlight broke through a dusty window, casting faint golden bars across scattered papers. Somewhere behind her, she overheard Sylvia's voice, unmistakably loud and self-satisfied. "I reminded the judge just last week about those overlooked amendments. Can't let these little mistakes slide." Vanessa's heart skipped. The phrase struck a chord deep within her memory. She glanced down at the yellow post-it she'd earlier collected. Note scribbled clearly, "Remind me to check page 8, VP." The initials matched hers, a rare coincidence or a secret thread. Suddenly, this small slip of paper, so easily dismissed before, felt like a lifeline woven through the chaos. Tears still threatening, she forced herself up, securing the papers in a neat pile. Her gaze locked on that note again. This wasn't just about cleaning up her mess anymore. It was about proving she belonged, that beneath the humiliation and stilled files, she might just hold a key no one else saw. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. Vanessa's knees pressed against the cold, unforgiving marble floor, the thin fabric of her trench coat scraping harshly against the polished surface. Her hands were slick with clammy sweat as she fumbled, desperate to find the missing postlet that had escaped her grasp moments ago. Around her, the quiet bustle of the courtroom fading into a background murmur, punctuated by the faint metallic scent of freshly spilled coffee from an overturned thermos nearby. The air felt thick with tension and humiliation, the smell sharp and intrusive, as if drawing attention to her clumsy, fallen state. She could feel the eyes of the room upon her, the wary looks from clients, the barely concealed smirks of opposing counsel, and the distant, inscrutable gaze of Judge Miriam Goldstein. Every nerve in Vanessa's body screamed with a despair that was almost physical. When the yellow slip of paper finally slid into her fingers, crumpled and marked with the neat handwriting that read, "Remind me to check page 8, VP," a small pulse of hope flickered inside her chest. The initials VP, her own, felt like a secret signal left behind in the chaos. Yet the gravity of the situation weighed her down. Pulling herself upright, she glanced towards Sylvia Barnes, who was confidently organizing her own documents. Vanessa's eyes caught something unsettling. Sylvia's submission conspicuously ended at page 6. No sign of the attachments the judge seemingly expected to review. Almost instinctively, a memory surfaced. She'd overheard Michael, the court clerk, once mention how judges relied heavily on their staff to catch missing or forged evidence, often through subtle marks or notes like the one she now held. Vanessa's mind raced. If Sylvia had purposefully left out pages, it could mean serious misconduct, something that might turn the tide if only she could prove it. But it was a dangerous realization. Confronting this truth meant risking every fragile thread of credibility she'll barely manage to weave in this high-stakes environment. Her pulse hammered with anxiety and resolve. Her gaze flickered back to the judge's stern profile, noting the brief tightening of Judge Goldstein's lips as she perused Sylvia's pile of documents. The puzzle pieces clicked silently in Vanessa's mind, the post-it note transforming from an overlooked scrap into a decisive clue, a beacon lighting a path through the uncertainty. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath alongside Vanessa, unaware that beneath the surface of this ordinary session, a quiet battle of justice was beginning to take shape. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. Vanessa lingered near the heavy oak courtroom door, her fingers gently tracing the creases of the yellow post-it she'd found on the floor earlier. The words, "Remind me to check page 8, VP," echoed in her mind. She knew she was clutching a thread that could unravel the whole case if only she could tie the pieces together. Quietly, she approached Michael, the elderly court clerk whose weathered face and steady hands contrasted with the brisk pulse of the courtroom. "Michael," she began softly, voice a shade above a whisper, "I think something's missing from the evidence Sylvia submitted. See this note? The judge wrote this, but there's no page 8 in Sylvia's exhibit." She laid the post-it gently atop the stack of documents on his desk. His brows furrowed thoughtfully as he reached for his computer, fingers tapping deliberately on the keyboard. Pulling up the courthouse's official procedures, Michael pointed to a clearly stated rule. Any case materials numbered beyond page 6 must bear a receipt stamp and require direct reference by the judge to be admissible. If there's no stamp or no mention, the evidence might be invalid, he explained, eyes locking with Vanessa's, impressed despite himself. The sound of the clock ticking echoed loud and urgent in the hallway. The judge had set a strict deadline. The recess was only minutes away, and all evidence had to be filed before then. Vanessa's mind raced. If her theory was off, she could face serious consequences, being barred from assisting in future cases, or even losing her job. Her boss, Mrs. Caldwell, had already made her doubts painfully clear throughout the day with thinly veiled looks and curt remarks. The risk felt immense, almost unbearable. Yet beneath the weight of possibility, Vanessa's resolve steadied. She remembered her parents' sacrifices, the long nights her father spent scrubbing floors, the early mornings her mother woke to clean other families' homes. Giving up now wasn't an option, not when this note offered a real chance to prove the truth hidden beneath the polished veneer of courtly proceedings. Michael looked up again, a quiet smile breaking his usual reserved demeanor. "You've got a good eye, Vanessa," he said. "Let's bring this up to the judge, but you'll have to speak carefully. Submissions can't be challenged lightly." especially with Sylvia Barnes on the other side. Nodding, Vanessa pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the familiar flutter of anxiety mixed with a rare spark of hope. Steeling herself for what might come, she glanced back toward the courtroom, the polished floors gleaming under the afternoon light. The risk was real, the stakes high, but for the first time all day, Vanessa felt she was no longer just a background player. She might just change the game. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. Vanessa took a slow, steadying breath before rising from the hallway bench. The yellow post-it clutched in her hand felt heavier now. No longer just a forgotten note, but a symbol of possibility. Entering the courtroom once more, she stepped forward when Judge Miriam Goldstein glanced in her direction. An unspoken invitation to speak. The judge's sharp eyes softened, giving Vanessa the small nod she needed. "Your Honor," Vanessa began, voice firm despite the thrumming tension in her chest. "I would like to point out a procedural detail regarding the evidence submitted by opposing counsel." She carefully placed the post-it on the judge's desk, letting the neat, handwritten message come into view. "Remind me to check page 8, VP." As she spoke, Michael, the elderly court clerk, moved from his station to bring up the official record on his tablet. Vanessa's gaze briefly met his. His expression held quiet encouragement beneath a furrowed brow. Judge Goldstein's notes clearly requested a review of page 8 in the exhibit, Vanessa continued. But the submission by Ms. Barnes ends at page 6, omitting any subsequent documents. She added, according to court policy, Michael subtly tapped the screen. All materials beyond page 6 must be accompanied by a receipt stamp and directly referenced by the judge to be admissible. A tense silence settled over the room. Sylvia Barnes, seated confidently at the defense table moments before, suddenly stiffened. Her carefully manicured fingers clenched and unclenched on the polished wood, eyes narrowing as Vanessa's words hung in the air. The courthouse, once filled with steady whispers and shuffling papers, grew still. Every listener drawn into the unseen fracture now widening in Sylvia's case. Judge Goldstein leaned forward, scanning the documents and the post-it closely. "Ms. Barnes," she addressed the opposing counsel, voice cool but carrying weight. "Can you account for the absence of page 8 in your submissions? It was noted for review." Sylvia opened her mouth, hesitated, and then forced a tight smile. "Your Honor, there was a clerical oversight. The document was not deemed relevant," she replied, but the certainty in her eyes had dimmed just slightly, betrayed by a flicker of unease. Michael quickly cross-referenced the official timestamps and digital submissions, nodding toward the judge. "There is no record of page 8, Your Honor. It was never officially filed." The judge's gaze returned to Vanessa, and for the first time, a slight approving curve touched her lips. The atmosphere shifted. The power Sylvia wielded so comfortably was quietly, irrevocably challenged. Vanessa's heart pounded, but a calm sense of purpose settled over her. The tide had turned. What began as a harsh day of whispered skepticism and barely concealed contempt was now an undeniable assertion of truth and fairness. Sylvia's composure visibly faltered, confidence draining like water through cupped hands, as those in the courtroom registered the significance of Vanessa's discovery with a mix of surprise and respect. Every eye lingered on Vanessa, the underestimated paralegal who dared to speak up. And though the final verdict was still unwritten, in this moment, Vanessa embodied the quiet power of perseverance, integrity, and sharp observation, the very qualities that often go unnoticed until they change everything. When dignity finally speaks, who tends to listen in your world? Judge Miriam Goldstein closed the file with a deliberate thud, the sound resonating through the hushed courtroom. Vanessa stood near the front, holding her notes with trembling fingers, her heart pounding in her chest. The judge's gaze swept over the gathered crowd before settling on Sylvia Barnes, whose usually confident posture had crumpled. The tension in the room was palpable, each person waiting for the verdict that would finally settle the dispute. After reviewing all submissions and with the assistance of the court clerk's thorough audit, Judge Goldstein began, voice steady and clear, "it has come to our attention that a critical document, page 8, was intentionally omitted from opposing counsel's evidence. This document, a prior settlement agreement, directly impacts the validity of the claims presented by Ms. Barnes's client." Sylvia's eyes darted nervously to the judge, her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, a flicker of vulnerability broke through her polished exterior. "Your Honor," she began haltingly, "this was an oversight." "Ms. Barnes," the judge interrupted firmly, "this omission is not a trivial error. It constitutes misconduct under court regulations, specifically Section 5.2, concerning complete and truthful disclosure of evidence." A collective murmur stirred among the spectators as Judge Goldstein turned to Vanessa. "Ms. Price," she said, her tone unexpectedly warm yet authoritative, "your diligence and keen attention to detail have brought this breach to light. Your efforts serve the cause of justice today." A wave of relief and pride soared through Vanessa. The endless doubts, the mocking whispers, the sharp glances, they all collided in this moment of vindication. Her supervisor, Mrs. Caldwell, who had sat silently all morning with a skeptical expression, now leaned forward, eyes wide with surprise and respect. Judge Goldstein continued, "Given the severity of the omission, the evidence submitted by Ms. Barnes's client is hereby struck from the record, rendering their claims invalid. This court sanctions Ms. Barnes with a formal reprimand, which will be recorded and forwarded to her firm's director." The courtroom scene shifted as relief settled over Vanessa's client, who had stood silently beside her throughout the hearing. Gratitude shone in their eyes as they grasped Vanessa's hand, a quiet affirmation of her role in securing a just outcome. Sylvia gathered her papers stiffly, the sharp edge of her earlier confidence replaced by a forced calm. Yet the damage was clear, her reputation tarnished, her case defeated by the very evidence she'd attempted to sideline. Vanessa allowed herself a small, steadying breath. The moment was hers, not just a triumph over humiliation and fear, but a public acknowledgement of her integrity and perseverance. For years, she'd been underestimated, overlooked in hallways and offices, but here, before the stern gaze of the law and those gathered, she stood reclaimed. Her eyes met the judge's one last time, and in that brief nod, Vanessa recognized her own worth, not measured by titles or appearances, but by the courage to speak up when it mattered most. The rustle of papers, the turning of heads, the whispered congratulations, all signaled a new chapter. Vanessa Price had not only won the case, she'd won respect. "If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward." The courthouse corridors had quieted as the afternoon sun dipped lower through the tall windows, casting long shadows that stretched and coiled over the polished floor. Vanessa Price adjusted her rain-speckled portfolio, the leather worn soft by years of careful use, and felt a steady calm settle over her shoulders. The trembling anxiety from earlier was replaced by a quiet pride that filled her as surely as the fading light around her. Judge Miriam Goldstein approached quietly, her gaze kind but serious. "Miss Price," she said softly, voice low enough that only Vanessa could hear. "Worth isn't measured by a title, but by what you do when nobody else is watching." The words, simple yet profound, echoed through Vanessa's chest like a balm. For years, she had felt invisible in this world of polished professionals, the quiet paralegal with no pedigree, no powerful connections, barely noticed. But if integrity and perseverance defined true value, she had already won far more than a case today. Michael, the elderly court clerk who had been her steady, quiet anchor all day, caught Vanessa's eye from across the hallway. He lifted a thumb with a gentle smile, his weathered face lighting up with warmth. Vanessa returned the gesture, a silent thank you crossing between them. He had believed in her when others barely gave her a second glance. From the far end of the hall, Mrs. Caldwell, her boss and longtime skeptic, emerged with an expression changed by humility. She approached Vanessa with cautious sincerity, her voice measured but sincere. "Vanessa, I was wrong to doubt you. That day, It showed all of us who you really are. Without another word, she handed Vanessa a formal letter. It was an offer, a permanent position, recognition at last. The papers felt heavy in Vanessa's hand, but carried lightness for her spirit. Outside, the rain had finally ceased. Sunlight spilled across the street, dappling puddles and glinting off wet leaves. Vanessa stepped into the fresh air, her trench coat brushing softly against her sides. She raised her eyes to the sky and exhaled slowly, feeling the weight she had carried ease in the warmth of the late afternoon. Every step back into the world beyond the courthouse was now marked not by uncertainty, but by newfound confidence. The knowledge that worth is quiet, steady, and often invisible until the moment it changes everything. If a moment like this ever hit close to home, I'd love to hear how you found your way forward. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.